let's talk about multiplying and dividing integers. So positives and negatives, multiplying and dividing. So if you look at the expression that I wrote, 3 groups of -2 in the black writing here, on a number line, 3 groups of -2. So I need to go to my negatives and I'm going to group, here's one group. Well, let me do a little bit better of a group here because I've got to start at 0 and go to the -2. So there's one group. Then another group, another -2 would go from -2 to -4. And then another group goes from -4 to -6. So there's 3 groups and there's 2 negatives in each group. So to write out 3 groups of -2, we would write 3 multiplied by -2. So where did I end up with? I ended up at a -6. So 3 multiplied by -2 is -6. Now let's look at the green expression that I wrote on the bottom. Here I wrote the opposite of 3 groups of -2. All right, so let's worry about the opposite in a second. Let's go back to this, 3 groups of -2. So that's 3 groups of -2. But now when I say the opposite of something, the opposite would be -3 times -2. And then that takes the words the opposite and puts it into mathematical form because the opposite of +3 is -3. So if I do 3 groups of -2 again, 1 group, 2 group, 3 group, and I end up at -6, I've got to now do the opposite of -6. Well, what is the opposite of -6? +6. So that is why -3 times -2 gives us a +6. So in multiplication and division, when we multiply 2 negative numbers, it's like the opposite of 5 groups of -2. So a -5 multiplied by a -2 gives us a +10. We don't use the same adding algorithms where it's 2 negatives, add and keep the negative sign. It's not 2 negatives, multiply and keep the negative sign. 2 negatives in multiplication makes your final answer positive. So let's do another example. -8 multiplied by -3. What would that be? 24 or -24? Positive, because we had 2 negatives. So if I have 2 positives, 5 times 3 positives, we did that in elementary school, 5 times 3 is 15. What if I have 1 positive or 1 negative and 1 positive? -5 times 3, then our answer is negative. So to recap, when we have 2 negatives and we multiply them together, our answer is positive. When we have a negative and a positive and multiply them together, our answer is negative. Now, it doesn't matter, like let's say I made the 3 a negative. It doesn't matter which number has the higher absolute value in multiplication. It's just if I see a negative and a positive, my answer is always negative. Same thing happens with division. So for example, if I do -20 divided by 5, negative, divide by positive, I get a negative answer. If I do a negative divided by a negative, my answer becomes positive. One of the reasons for division here is because these negatives, technically, I can rewrite this problem with the -1 here, because that means the same thing. -1 times 20 is -20, and then these -1s divided by -1s turn into a +1. Because how many times does -1 fit into a -1? 1 time. So then that's kind of why the negatives are canceling out with division. So let's do a few examples. Go ahead, write these problems down, pause the video, and solve them yourself. All right, now you can go ahead and check your answers. Number 1's negative because I had a positive and a negative. Number 2 is positive because I had 2 negatives. Number 3, negative answer because I had a positive and a negative. Hope that helps.